It's the black guy in the corner, but they'd rather see a on the corner. They say I'm stealing Nick's clips like I'm stealing Nick's chick, not knowing that I hit him first week for the lick. I said, Nick, I could post here while you post there. Let's run the ads up, then let's meet up over there.
I, as well, am on Team Civilization. I'm very happy to see Hamas's top leaders killed. I hope that as many of them in the leadership, with as little loss of civilian life as possible, I hope that as many of them died in this attack as humanly possible.
All right, so we're going to get into this interview that was from a few days ago. I want to just highlight more about Ben Shapiro's response to a lot of Charlie Kirk's questions regarding Israel, America's influence, or Israel's influence on America, and America backing Israel with a lot of the wars that are going on right now in the Middle East region. I'm only going to stop it once in the middle and give some feedback and then wait all the way until the end. Y'all know I like to let it play through on these videos to give y'all as much context as possible to make sure that I'm being fair in my response and making sure that y'all can receive, like I said, the full context. So let's get into the video and I'll see y'all in the field. And real quickly, before I start the video, I want to be clear that I see a lot of these videos that are very emotional with people that maybe knew Charlie or Charlie had a great impact on their lives. And obviously on the other side, you see it radicalized with people that feel that Charlie wasn't a good person. You're going to hear all these radical things back and forth. In my opinion, we need more balance, more respect and dignity when we're having a lot of these conversations. And in my opinion, a lot of these radical responses and reactions on both sides are a prime example of how far gone we've gotten in society. And I want that to be highlighted in this conversation between Ben Shapiro and Charlie Kirk. Like, I want you to approach it with that lens, or from that mindset, I should say. And I want you to ask yourself as you're watching this, what is your foundational understanding? What are your foundational principles when it comes to humanity? You're getting ready to hear Ben Shapiro discuss war in ways that, in my opinion, are very offensive to humanity, don't align with anybody's religious principles, violate God's commandments, but they're just accepted when it's in favor of a particular group or another. So, like I said, I'll give y'all my feedback in the middle and at the end. I didn't mean to talk your heads off in the beginning so much, but obviously in respect of, Charlie and his death, I just wanted to preface it with that this video, like all of my other videos, based on my stance that I express to y'all all the time, I'm not with war and I'm not with violence, period. When you can start to justify war because this side did it, or justify this death, it just ultimately will lead to the destruction of everybody. It ultimately will lead to the destruction of everybody. Nobody will forget where it started once you start going tit for tat. And it ultimately just ends with a whole bunch of deaths and a whole bunch of us being misled and being divided so these elites can conquer us and lead us whatever way that benefits them at the detriment of us and our lives. So let's get into the video.
We're on Team Civilization here. We want to see the maniacs of Hamas be defeated. So we've seen news this morning that, quite honestly, I'm a little confused by, and I was hoping you could navigate it and help us understand, which is that Israel bombed Qatar, which houses a lot of Hamas officials. What happened here? And if I were to introduce just the skeptical question, will this potentially endanger America's own interests in the Middle East? So please, Ben, help me better understand the situation.
Sure. So I think that the lead up to understand here is that Qatar sort of plays both sides when it comes to its negotiating stance between Hamas and Israel and the United States. So it has provided extraordinary material support to Hamas directly, billions of dollars in material support to Hamas. The leadership of Hamas have been living in Qatar for years at five-star hotels. Hamas's priorities have been pressed by Qatar in negotiations multiple times. Qatar has not put significant pressure on Hamas in the past to release the hostages or to end the war. And so basically, as Israel nears the end of the war, which is what this last movement in Gaza City is supposed to be, that there was a final offer that was put on the table actually by the Trump administration that essentially said that Hamas should release the remaining 48 hostages, meaning 28 dead bodies and 20 alive hostages. And the United States would then guarantee, through its own honest brokerage, some sort of end to the war that would result in the disarming of Hamas and the movement of the Gaza Strip to presumably some sort of coalitional government supported by regional states and the rebuilding of the area. And Qatar was pushing Hamas, apparently, we heard. And Hamas this morning in Arabic actually rejected it. That's not been widely reported by the media, but it's true. Hamas actually rejected the American offer. The president had put out via Truth Social a statement saying, this is your last chance, and if you don't do that, bad things are going to happen. The idea that Israel would be able to fly 10 F-16s all the way across the Middle East to Qatar to strike a very specific terror target in Doha without American knowledge beggars the imagination. It is extraordinarily unlikely, to say the very least. Honestly, it would not be wildly improbable if Qatar knew that was coming as well. And so Israel struck at the top level of the remaining Hamas in Qatar in an attempt to basically change the negotiating status. So the basic idea here is if you will not negotiate, if you refuse to get to the end of this war, well, then maybe we'll find somebody who can. Or maybe the idea is that you're safe nowhere until this war ends. Additional pressure had to be brought to bear, and that's why Israel did what it did. Obviously, I, as well, am on Team Civilization. I'm very happy to see Hamas's top leaders killed. I hope that as many of them in the leadership, with as little loss of civilian life as possible, I hope that as many of them died in this attack as humanly possible. And again, I'd be very surprised. I mean, we do know actually from contemporaneous reporting that the United States was at least given the heads up on the Israeli operation in the moments before it went.
I just spent time in Japan, and one of the things that kind of looms over Japan is that Japan, they engaged in an unconditional surrender. That they said, we're done. And they laid down their arms, obviously, after the 2 atomic bombs. Very controversial. People have mixed opinions on it. I certainly do. But that it is unconditional surrender. Is that what Israel is aiming for here? I suppose that is a question that I get a lot on campus. What does success look like? Because I think we could all agree a long war is not good for Israel, a long, drawn-out war. And we're coming towards 2 years in about a month. So it's been about 23 months. So what does ultimate success look like in the Gaza Strip?
So my main critique of the Netanyahu administration in Israel and the Netanyahu government is they didn't move faster. I think this should have been a much more accelerated process. Israel set out at the beginning of this war with 2 goals, as articulated by the Israeli government. Goal number 1 was to get as many hostages out as humanly possible to free the hostages. And second was to win the war. In many ways, those are mutually exclusive goals, because if you actually wish to win the war, then you have to do things militarily that are going to involve actual movement on the ground. And meanwhile, Hamas is attempting to basically use the hostages as its own form of human shields. They've used their own civilians as human shields. They're also using the hostages as a form of human shield. And so as you came to the end of the war, this was always going to be the question, is how the war kind of came to its final terminus. The priorities that Netanyahu has laid out publicly include essentially, basically, it's let the hostages out, and there can't be a future military threat to Israel. Those are, if you had to sum it all up, those are the 2 things. How that materializes, in my opinion, is likely to be an Israeli military occupation of large swaths of the Gaza Strip, the setting up of humanitarian areas, particularly on the coast and in Rafah, in which humanitarian aid is provided, a pathway out for people who actually want to leave. This is the only conflict of which I'm aware on planet Earth in which there are outside countries telling people who would like to leave that they literally cannot. The Trump administration has been trying to facilitate the ability of people who want to leave to do so, and has also been trying to facilitate the entry of not only humanitarian aid, but investment into the areas that have been cleared of terrorists. And then you can see some sort of Hamas-free rebuilding. That would be the goal of the end of the war. Now, my understanding is that the sort of last untouched area of the Gaza Strip in terms of Israeli serious military operations is Gaza City. It's why there's been so much focus on Gaza City. Last I heard, Israel already controls something 40 to 50% of the territory in Gaza City. They've been warning people to get out for at least a couple of weeks now. Hamas has been stopping people at checkpoints and turning them back and shooting them if they don't stay in the city to be used as human shields by Hamas. So that's the current situation on the ground.
What other feedback or criticism would you have about this situation? I know that it's impossible for anyone to listen to everything that you ever say, but looking at this from an American perspective, what else would you say things could have been handled differently? Maybe on the PR front, maybe also just on a conduct front. Where would you say, as an outsider, things that could have been handled better, more efficiently, or with more precision?
So number one, there's no such thing as a perfect war. So obviously in any war, there are going to be things that happen that are ugly and that are terrible. And that is why war is a terrible thing. As far as a sort of operational front, again, I've spent an awful lot of time in Israel. I've watched tape of operations happening, drone operations. I've met with an enormous number of Israeli soldiers, young men and women, people who are 18, 19, 20 years old, who have had legitimately their limbs blown off going house to house in an area where they didn't have to. The charge that Israel has been indiscriminate in its use of force in the Gaza Strip is an absurdity on its face. Israel has complete air superiority over the Gaza Strip. If it wanted to level the place and turn it into a parking lot October 8th, it certainly had the military capacity to do so. It has not done that. Instead, it has sacrificed legitimately 1,000 of its own young men, particularly in these areas, and thousands more who are wounded for the rest of their lives, going house to house in an attempt to prevent all of that, and is currently shipping in 4,400 calories per day per person into the Gaza Strip, much of which is then stolen by Hamas. So that is not to say that any war is perfect. This war has been conducted in about as meticulous way as any urban war in history. Just because war is ugly doesn't mean that it's being fought wrongly. And I think that the main mistake that Israel has made is misunderstanding how public relations works, in the sense that they couldn't have presented this war in a better, kinder way that people would have loved. What they could have done is move faster. And the reality is that the American way of doing war is to win as fast as possible. And we don't like long, drawn-out occupations. We don't like long, drawn-out military operations. That's true in Iraq. It's true in Afghanistan. It's true in Ukraine. It's true in the Gaza Strip. And so the kind of things that we Americans like to see are, for example, the operations against Hezbollah that took about 3 weeks to 5 weeks, or the operation against Iran, which took about 12 days, right? Those are operations that any ally of the United States can sustain. Long operations like the one that Israel has been performing in the Gaza Strip are inherently very, very difficult from PR level. And I'm not sure, to be frank, that there is a way for Israel to, quote unquote, win the PR war in the middle of a very long war against an intransigent terrorist enemy that legitimately embeds itself in the most damaging places.
All right, if I may, I want to respond to the first half of the video. Y'all know what I do. I write my notes and then I give my feedback so I can have a conversation with y'all. All right, so Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro, just overall, let me get my bias out the way. Ben Shapiro is just another example of, I wrote down like elitist, but I'm not sure elitist is the right term. He just seems to come across as one of those type of people that really does believe that him and his people are God's chosen people. And to be totally honest, a lot of other groups of people, religions, races, however you want to divvy it up, a lot of other people believe that as well. They just may not say it or identify with a slogan of putting it out there so much as if you're God's chosen people. But this elitist, racist, religionist, whatever you want to call it, mindset that you think that you and yours are better than other people, it comes across in this entire conversation. So here's a couple things that I made notes on. Ben Shapiro tries to throw America under the bus and Donald Trump, in my opinion, and show that we supported Israel in bombing Qatar. He made those statements saying that, well, it's hard for me to believe that Israel could have flown over in that region and America not have known. And even though America came out and Donald Trump came out afterwards and said that, you know, once he was aware of the planned strike, he ordered Special Envoy Steve Witkoff to notify Qatari officials. So obviously Ben's statements directly contradict Donald Trump. And that's ironic in a few different ways. For one, the arrogance and the audacity that a lot of people who are Zionist and pro-Israel show, it comes across in many ways. And it made me think about Netanyahu after Charlie Kirk's passing. Netanyahu, I believe, put out a message, a post, confirming that Charlie had passed and making a statement on Charlie Kirk's death before Donald Trump even did. To me, that was highly disrespectful. It showed the arrogance and it showed the power. It showed the power that Bibi Netanyahu and Israel believe that they have over America. Perhaps they do have it. So when you have Ben Shapiro coming out and contradicting what Donald Trump said and pretty much calling his bluff, saying like, yeah, Trump could say that he didn't know about it, but they knew. Matter of fact, Qatar probably knew. Like, this is the mindset. But then it's like a lot of these same people who have absolutely no problem criticizing or calling out Trump and the American government for lying. You get in trouble when you start talking about Israel's government. You get in trouble when you start talking about Bibi Netanyahu. You get taken out of college and sent back to your country when you start speaking of Israel in a certain type of way. And it's just, I'm just always paying attention and always trying to connect the dots, not make up dots, but just really paying attention to how people say things, what they mean by it, and the vantage point that they're saying it from, and how they're trying to influence us by saying it. And let me be very clear. When he said that statement, as far as it's hard for him to believe that America wasn't aware that Israel was striking Qatar, I actually believe him. I actually agree with him. I just think that he's got the arrogance and, you know, the kahunas, whatever you want to call it, to actually say it and pretty much call Trump out. And that arrogance, in my opinion, that level of comfort only comes when you have somebody that is in a more powerful position than Donald Trump and the American government in your corner. That's how I received it. So it's not that I thought that he was lying. I'm just like, damn, he got he really gonna come out here and say that? Even though Trump was trying to hide behind it and say different things and say he wasn't aware, he's not okay with it. And you could tell Trump probably didn't know, because even how Trump responded. Do I have any of Trump's responses to it? Even how Trump responded, it was like kind of, I'm very happy about very unhappy about every aspect. What else did he say? Not a good situation, not thrilled. It's like, bro, if this was any other leader in any other country, in my opinion, you would have much stronger statements regarding them and what they did, especially if you truly weren't aware of it. Just my opinion. And staying here for a second before we move on, Ben Shapiro in Israel and Bibi Netanyahu and a lot of super pro-Israeli Zionist people have manipulated the MAGA party and Trump to compromise their morals, values, and integrity, and their stance of putting America first and making America great again, for making Israel great and for putting Israeli politics and agendas first. Now, you may sit back and say, well, how are they manipulating it? Well, I actually look back and I'm like, damn, how'd they do that? Like, a bit impressed, but obviously I don't align with how they leverage this or what they leverage this power for, but they definitely have leveraged power over Trump and the American government, because people on both sides of the aisle, Democrats and Republicans, are scared to death to push against Israel. And the reason why I say that they've manipulated the MAGA party and Trump is because a lot of these people were never Trumpers. We know how Trump's ego operates. We know how petty he is, how you say something about Trump 10, 15, 20 years ago and he holds it against you. But these same people that Trump is buddy with and rubbing shoulders with and relying on for advice, and Trump getting behind them and their agendas, these are the same people that couldn't stand him, saying he's an idiot, saying never Trumpers, all this stuff that they were talking about Trump. Now Trump listens to them and does exactly what they say. All right, so let's move on. Ben Shapiro said, I'm on Team Civilization, and I'm very happy to see Hamas's leaders killed. The arrogance once again. When I heard that, mixed with my opinions on Ben Shapiro going into this show, along with all of his responses in this show thus far, I just sat here and thought, like, he must really think he's one of God's people, one of God's chosen people. He must really believe that. And he must believe that his people solely are God's chosen people. Now, why do I say this? What makes the terror that Hamas commits so much different than the propagandized stories that are relayed to us about the terror that Israel commits in that region? What makes one group's terror worse than another group's terror? Now, we can sit here and say, oh, well, this group did this. And the reason why I said propagandized because a lot of these stories that come out to us, let's just be totally honest, we've been getting manipulated by the media, by politicians, by Bibi Netanyahu for decades. For decades. They've been saying certain things to us that were complete lies, things that have always been told through an Israeli vantage point, a pro-Israel lens. We've been getting lied to. Bibi Netanyahu coming over here, the whole reason that we were in the Iraq war. The whole reason that we were in the Iraq war, and I'm not going to touch on that too long because I think we're going to talk about that in a second, but been lying since then, saying that Saddam and Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. All those, 500 children dead later, no weapons of mass destruction. But what makes the Hamas terror, I can understand from your standpoint, because one is happening to you and your people. So I can understand from that standpoint, but everybody else who's not either Jewish, pro-Israel, Zionist, whatever, aligned in that direction, or has direct ties to one of those groups, why do you think that we're looking at this as if Hamas and everything that the quote unquote terrorist organizations have done in that region to Israel are any different than what Israel has done in that region to the people that were actually there before Israel was created in 48? Now, I know you'll sit here and say, a lot of the pro-Israel people will say, well, this land was given to us by God, and this was our land 3,000 years ago. Look, if you feel so strongly about that, then maybe you should give up your land in America, because you're on conquered people's land, right? I'm pretty sure that we can acknowledge that the land that you live in New York City or Miami, the places that I'm living in, your people did not own that land 3,000 years ago. 300 years ago, right? Let's go back 400, 500 years ago. That wasn't your land, correct? So if you feel so strongly about people being entitled to the land that was given to them so long ago, then why don't you put up and actually be an example, lead by example in America, and give up your land to the indigenous people that were here, right? Oh, okay, all right. That's different. That's different, because God commanded you to have Israel and take the Palestinians' land. I get it. A little bit different. So that's why that's justified terror, right? That's justified violence. I get it. Okay. And before we move on, America's not off the hook either. What makes a lot of this terror that we see, that how they portray these Muslim groups and Islamic radicals, what makes that terror any worse than what American soldiers have come over here and said that they're pissed off because of the terror that they committed in other countries under American direction and instruction? That's why a lot of these, we just had somebody come on the show on Friday, talk about how pissed off he was of the destruction and chaos and violence that he had to commit in other countries, and how his brothers in the military died, all based on lies. All based on lies. We hear these stories all the time from these soldiers when they talk about what they were instructed to do. So I'm not here to look. That's why I stand on what I started off the show. All this war is wrong. The violence is wrong. There's a reason, maybe. I mean, y'all tell me. Y'all are a lot of the Christian folk, a lot of the Jewish folk. Isn't your commandment, thou shalt not kill? So if your commandment is thou shalt not kill, but you now, that comes from God, right? Influenced by God. But now you as man, you believe that you're intelligent enough and responsible enough to now make certain decisions as to say, well, we can, that rule doesn't apply in this particular area. Now we can create carve-outs for your particular group, since you're God's chosen people, right? You see how this isn't consistent when the commandments say one thing, but then we'll use scripture to justify other things. But it's man's misinterpretation of a lot of these scriptures, because the commandments are clear. The commandments are clear, and that's what's funny about, or I shouldn't say what's funny. Perhaps I should say that's what's very purposeful when you look at a lot of these, the Bible and a lot of other scriptures when it comes to the 10 commandments. These commandments were not up for interpretation. Now, the other things that are in the Bible, totally understand. But there's certain things that are not up for man's interpretation. So when we sit back and we justify certain people being killed, and when Ben Shapiro says that he was happy that the Hamas leaders were killed, let me ask you a question. If we are all God's children, how happy do you think that God would be for Ben Shapiro to be happy that Hamas leaders were killed? When he sits here and says, I'm on team civilization. The only team civilization that I'm aware of is the team of God's children, right? Or does man and certain groups of people get to decide who counts as far as team civilization and humanity, as far as which lives matter to God, right? As all of us being God's children, unless we're all not God's children. So these are just the contradictions that I see over and over with a lot of people that claim to be religious, but then you're also okay with war. You're always going to contradict yourself. You're always going to be a walking contradiction. And it's always going to be in favor, well, I should say most times going to be in favor of you and your group. Why? Because you care more about the lives of your people. Like most of us, we care more about the lives of our family and our group than other people. It just is what it is. So with that being said, and accepting that as reality, perhaps that is why the commandments are what they are. Thou shalt not kill. Perhaps that is why we shouldn't have war crimes. War should just be a crime, because obviously we're always going to look at it from a viewpoint that, oh, okay, this killing or this war, I'm looking at it to protect me and mine first. And if that means killing you and yours first and aggressively and being on the offense, then that's what we'll do. And that's what Bibi Netanyahu has said over and over. He said it in the Patrick Bet David podcast, and he said it on other podcasts as well, that we're not waiting to get attacked. We're going to aggressively attack before another atrocity happens to us and our people. It just doesn't work. So Ben Shapiro says that you can't go to war in a kind way. I agree, which is why I just said that's why you shouldn't have wars. The standard should not be set by war crimes. The standard should be, we can't have wars. We're humanity. We're the most advanced creature on this planet. So if we can't figure out how to solve things in a more mature than animalistic way that animals do it in the jungle, then perhaps we need to look at ourselves, reevaluate our relationship with God, reevaluate our relationship with our religion, and put pressure on ourselves to demand more and to create a different way of solving problems rather than killing people. And also, this is where the elitism comes into play. Who dies in most wars? Who dies in most wars? Are the elites dying? Or is it the people that make a decision like, oh, I got to go to the army. I can't find a job anywhere else? Now, it may not always be that, but in any war, going back in the history of our planet, who have been the people that die the most in wars? What did Achilles say in Troy? Now, obviously, that's a movie. But he said to Agamemnon, it'll be a day when kings fight their own battles. If you're so pro-war and if you're okay with people dying, then why don't you just go fight their leader? If y'all are okay with death, why don't y'all just go fight to the death if that's what you believe in? Now, I'm not for that. But if you're okay with other people, like it just says a lot about the type of leader that's okay with other people frontlining these wars while you take no risk, or you take the limited risk. If you're the one making the decisions, put yourself on the line more than anybody else because it's your decision. That would just be my mindset. But let me be clear once again, I am not for wars. And another thing when it comes to these wars and in the elitism, imagine this elitism. Bibi Netanyahu coming to America to discuss and pressure us. And my apologies if you hear the vacuum. They're vacuuming in the hallway. It's not in the apartment. But my apologies nonetheless. But Bibi Netanyahu, when it comes to elitism, when it comes to you being God's chosen people, you were in America campaigning for us to go to war with Iraq after 9/11. And obviously the Iraq war, you know, it spanned years before that. But when you came over in both Iraq wars, I'm going to read some notes to you that I found or made on the Iraq war. But what's very strange to me is that you were in America campaigning how we should go to war with Iraq, how we have to stop Saddam. But no Israeli soldiers participated. How should Americans feel about that? And we're going to discuss something later on that Bibi said, or that Charlie Kirk asked Ben Shapiro about regarding Bibi Netanyahu, saying something, I don't want to quote it because we'll wait until the end of the interview, but he was saying something like, you can't be MAGA and not be like pro-Israel. And it's like the nerve. Once again, this is the elitism. You think that America, like you think you can comment on American politics when in that situation I'm referring to in the Iraq war, you had no skin in the game. Now, based on my research, it says that the United States or whoever was encouraged for it, that Israel, like a bunch of the allied nations were encouraged Israel to not deploy troops or for whatever reason. I don't know about any of it. Like, I don't know. I'd have to really do I'd really have to do a deep dive into this. But one thing that I do know that has been made clear is that Israeli troops were not sent to fight those wars. I know that American troops died. So now I guess we have to reevaluate some of the things that Bibi Netanyahu says. The nerve of you to say some of these things when you've been responsible for American deaths, when you didn't even have your skin in the game with your troops. And not only are you responsible for American deaths, but like I said earlier, when I was talking to the gentleman in the military on Friday's show, the live show, make sure y'all check that out. He was saying how pissed off he was being an American soldier, having his brothers die based on lies. Now this, what I'm referring to, the lie of them having weapons of mass destruction. Now you could say, oh, Bibi was just wrong. It's a very generous way to look at it. A very generous way leaning in Bibi Netanyahu's favor. I don't look at things in Bibi Netanyahu's favor based on his actions. I think that he lied. And at the very least, if you didn't lie, I've never heard him come out and apologize or anything like that. Matter of fact, now he's doing the opposite. Now he's trying to get us to support Israel in more wars, more regime change. Go take a look at that clean break memo. If you're not familiar, or if you don't think that this was all planned from years ago with Bibi Netanyahu. Everything that we're seeing happen in this region now, it's very consistent with the clean break memo that he had written by people who were in the US government 20-something years ago, around 20 years ago. So y'all can take a look at that on your own. But yeah, I just, before we move on and I let the video play, I just want to really leave y'all with that question, or picture that, you know, picture Ben Shapiro having a conversation with God and them discussing war. And him saying that just because war is ugly doesn't mean it's fought wrong. Think about that. Ben Shapiro said that just because war is ugly doesn't mean that it's fought wrong. Imagine him sitting down and having a conversation with God regarding all of God's children. And him saying, just because war is ugly doesn't mean it's fought wrong. And these are the religious folk, right? Y'all tell me I'm not even a religious guy. But, or perhaps religion is just what you claim to be. And not necessarily what your actions indicate you are. But let's move on to the second part of the video, and I'll see y'all at the end.
A claim I receive often, and we're starting our campus tour tomorrow, is that Israel is committing genocide. How do you respond to that, Ben?
There's literally no definition of genocide by which Israel is committing a genocide. Typically, a genocide involves the targeted killing of the vast majority of the population, or at least an attempt to do so. There has never been a genocide attempted in world history in which the food that was being shipped in was more than the daily caloric intake of the average American into the areas where you're supposedly attempting to genocide the population. The total population loss in the Gaza Strip thus far has been 3%. During the Holocaust, just to take a reference, it was 50%. During Rwanda, it was significantly higher than 3%. You don't issue leaflet warnings to people. You don't go house to house in a genocide in an attempt to reduce civilian casualties. I understand that people use genocide at this point to just mean thing I don't like. And I get that. I understand. Nobody likes war. Nobody wants war. Certainly not the Israelis who are not at war on October 6th. The fact is that every Israeli family has to send their 18-year-old son or daughter off to the military with the possibility that they're going to get blown up in Gaza. That is not something that any Israeli wants, right, left, or center. The real question is whether the accusations are accurate. They certainly are not, again, by any stretch of the imagination.
Author, Ben Shapiro, author of Lions and Scavengers. We're going to get to that in a second. I have one or two other questions on Israel. I think it's very important for our audience to hear this, though, because there is an incessant campaign. And one thing a friend said to me, interestingly, which is, okay, Charlie, we've pushed back against the media on COVID, on lockdowns, on Ukraine, on the border, so like maybe we should also ask a question. Is the media totally presenting the truth when it comes to Israel? Just a question, that maybe we shouldn't believe everything the media says, because I know I've been conditioned to ask a lot more critical questions over the last couple of years. So, Ben, some people would accuse Israel of wanting to ethnically cleanse. Some people in the Israeli government are saying, again, it's all over the place, right? You have opinions all over. In your opinion, what would a good outcome 5 years from now be, and how does one respond to the claims of ethnic cleansing?
So ethnic cleansing, the idea, presumably, that population movement is equivalent to ethnic cleansing. I think ethnic cleansing is a term that's been fairly recently coined to describe population movement during war. And the reality is that's been ongoing for literally all of human history. The idea that Israel is, quote unquote, forcing people out of the Gaza Strip, that is not the stated policy of the Israeli government. The idea is if people want to leave, they can, but they're not being forced to leave. Again, moving people out of heavily urbanized areas that are honeycombed with terrorist booby traps pretty much everywhere is not the same thing as, quote unquote, ethnic cleansing. And I think that ethnic cleansing is very often used as sort of a softer form of the genocide attack. The idea being that Israel is trying to kill everyone, which of course is not true. As far as your earlier question about what we believe from the media, one of the things that I find kind of astonishing in some of the folks on the right who are highly critical of Israel is actually the lack of the lack of skepticism when it comes to legacy media. Legacy media are radically anti-Israel overall. The New York Times can certainly not be accused of being a pro-Israel outlet. It'd be very difficult to make the accusation that the Associated Press, which has worked hand in glove with Hamas for years, or Reuters, that these are wildly pro-Israel outlets. And yet, when it comes to the reporting, it seems to be sort of the opposite.
Ben,
so the perception the legacy media is like owned by the Jews. And
I was going to say, Ben, come on.
Israel.
You Jews own the media, Ben. So, I mean, come on. As you could tell by all the wonderful headlines you guys get.
Well, I mean, dude, the accusation that we own the media has not prevented, the Daily Wire from employing people who radically disagree with me on all of these matters. I mean, I don't agree with Matt Walsh on foreign policy. Matt obviously is a major host over at Daily Wire, and that's just my shop. And I'm overtly pro-Israel. Right? I mean, I'm not making any bones about this. I'm a Jew and I'm a Zionist. I'm not going to pretend that to say otherwise would be absolutely silly. To suggest that some sort of atheistic Jewish person by birth who does not care about Judaism or Israel owning the New York Times means the New York Times is pro-Israel is to ignore literally every bit of coverage they have ever done for my entire lifetime.
We're running out of time here, but just last question on this, Ben. I know this might be a tougher question, but Bibi said, quote, I didn't like how he said this, I'll be honest. You can't be MAGA if you're anti-Israel. I don't like it for a couple reasons. How did you analyze that statement from Bibi?
I mean, I think that there is the ungenerous way of interpreting that and then the generous way of interpreting that. So the ungenerous way is to suggest that you have to hold a particular position on every Israeli governmental activity in order to be MAGA. Which, of course, is not true. I mean, you can disagree from the right or from the left with Bibi's policies, and you can still be plenty MAGA. I think the idea that Bibi is putting out there is that if you are taking Hamas's side against Israel in a conflict, it is very difficult to align that with the stated positions of the Trump administration or what President Trump himself is doing right now. I certainly is true.
You cannot look. I think you can have disagreements on Israel and still be MAGA. Obviously, you should be America first. But if you're pro Hamas, you're something darker, and we shouldn't put up with that. Ben, tell us about your important new book.
So the basic idea in Lions and Scavengers is that inside every human heart, and this goes back to the book of Genesis, that there really is the dutiful part of you that wants to engage in what God made for you, this incredible rationalistic world in which you can mostly understand what's going on, and you have a duty to do the moral thing. You get up every morning, you try to build something, you try to be innovative and risk-taking, you try to defend your civilization, you try to build the social fabric. And then there is the part of us that's driven by envy. And that part of us just looks at our problems and immediately attributes it to some shadowy force outside of our control and tries to rip down the very systems that actually provide prosperity, tries to rip down the lions out of pure envy. Here, think Zoran Mamdani. And that exists in all of us, but it exists civilizationally as well. And when you look at the sort of activities that were taking place on college campus last year, and you see the weird agglomeration of causes that all come together under varying banners. Sometimes it's hating President Trump over immigration. Sometimes it's on Israel. Sometimes it's on LGBT. But it's the same exact people all marching together. And you wonder to yourself, what do these people have in common? And the answer is pretty much nothing, except they really, really don't like our civilization and see the fundamental basis of our civilization as evil and wrong and believe that it needs to be torn out by the root. This is, to take the most obvious example, Queers for Palestine. Everybody's been puzzling over what the hell is that, right? Queers in Palestine get thrown off buildings. So what is it? The answer is that the radical LGBTQ group doesn't have much in common with the pro-Hamas group, except that both really, really hate the West and believe that the traditional values of our civilization need to be destroyed in order so that they can live more fulfilling lives in some way.
What would you say is the missing component for those of us in the West to stand up against these forces? What would you say we're doing well and that we need to do more of?
I mean, I think that what we lack, and I think we're starting to see a restoration of it, is the courage to actually stand up on our hind legs and say no. I think that good people tend to be introspective. We tend to think, okay, what did I do wrong? How do I fix that? And we tend to apologize when we do something wrong. Bad people tend to take an apology and then grind your face into the dust over it because they're not engaged in guilt cultures. They're engaged in what are called shame cultures, where the most important thing is not to be made to feel shame, and it is to shame others. And so I think that we, those of us who consider ourselves part of Western civilization, we need to recognize that a constant self-abnegation, a constant attempt to tear ourselves down out of a misguided sense of humility in the face of people who are happy to just destroy our civilization from without and within, that is a gigantic mistake. And it is totally fine to say to people who wish to destroy our civilization, no, your values suck and they don't belong here.
Where does all this resentment come from?
It comes from a wide variety of places, but it tends to come in general from a feeling of frustration and enervation. And so I think that you can get that from people who believe they have been marginalized. You can get that from people who believe they deserve more. You see it a lot, actually, with university students who seem to believe that they deserve a $250,000 salary for a gender studies degree because they've been taught that they ought to be getting more, and then they don't get it. And then they're angry at their parents for not having put them in a position to do that, and so they rebel against everything that they've been taught and everything they haven't been taught. I also think it comes from a bored population. Very often you have people who grew up without any sense of external threat, and they think that pretty much everything that's good in life is the baseline, that's just normal, and that you can tear away everything without the baseline falling away. That, of course, is just false. Some of it comes from ignorance. Some of it comes from envy. The reality is that gratitude as a characteristic of human beings has to be cultivated. It's something you have to teach your kids, gratitude. Envy is totally natural. Right? Envy is easy to do. You see it with small children, right? I have 4, and it's very easy to see kids envy each other and get on each other's case. Being grateful for what they have is a very difficult thing. You have to teach your kids to say thank you. You don't have to teach your kids to say no.
Ben, thank you for your time, and thanks for going through all the questions on the very important topics today. Lions and Scavengers is the book. Thanks so much, Ben.
Thanks, Charlie.
All right, so we're back with the second part. I'm going to get right into it. Let's start off with him saying there's literally no definition of genocide where Israel's actions would be considered a genocide, something like that, along those lines. So I said, you know what? Let me look at the definition. I'll read it to you all. And it says the most widely accepted legal definition of genocide comes from the United Nations Genocide Convention in 1948. Ironic. Genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. As such, killing members of the group, that was 1. 2, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. That's 2. Number 3 is deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. 4, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. 5, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. So now I'm looking at what we did in Iraq, and I'm wondering, when you think about 500,000 children dying and Madeleine Albright being asked if that was worth the cost, and her saying, yes, she believes it was worth it. Maybe these people's definitions of genocide is just not aligned with the religious values that they claim to have. Maybe that's the case. Maybe that's the case, because I'm looking at what's going on in Gaza, and it's very hard for me not to think, especially when you look up that clean break memo, as I hope some of y'all did, or I hope some of y'all will pause the video and look it up now. And the only reason why I don't elaborate on it now, because we've spoken about it in a bunch of past videos, but look that up. But when you look at that clean break memo and the intentions that Bibi Netanyahu made very clear for Israel in that region, it's very hard for me not to think that they used October 7th to initiate plans that they had all along. Now, that plan, in my opinion, was to take over that land and get rid of the population of people in that region. Gaza, the Palestinians. That's what I believe. Based on the actions, it's very hard to not think that, especially when you hear about, oh, well, there was already a deal that could have gone through with the hostages, and it seems like other battles are being fought rather than prioritizing what Ben Shapiro initially said was the priority as far as getting the hostages back. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe my bias is impacting how I'm looking at it. I'll let y'all tell me that in the comments. But there's no way that I can look at this list from killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mentally harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. Like, I don't see how you would look at it and describe it as anything other than a genocide. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. Let me get back to my notes. He got asked a question by Charlie Kirk about Jews controlling the media. And I believe that's where one of the stations, didn't one of the news outlets just get in trouble because they misrepresented Charlie Kirk saying that as a joke? He was clearly saying it as a joke, being sarcastic. I don't know what his true opinions were on it, but he was saying it as a joke. But like I said, I want to focus more on Ben Shapiro's responses rather than Charlie Kirk. Want to make sure that I'm being respectful. Ben Shapiro, when he answers this question as far as Jewish people controlling the media outlets in Israel, I'm not sure if it was Jewish or Israel, but I believe it was Jewish people controlling the media, which a lot of people say. He brings up the example of Matt Walsh, and he says Matt Walsh has opposing views, and Matt Walsh is on his platform, the Daily Wire. I think that was one of the most disingenuous statements that Ben Shapiro made on this show, and I'm going to tell you why. Well, let me not say that. Let me ask a question, because initially I'm thinking like, yo, he knows that nobody in their right mind. Like, that's what I was starting off with. But let me ask the question. Do you think Matt Walsh would express his stance in a different way if he wasn't on Daily Wire? Do you think that Matt Walsh would express his stances on Israel and how we get roped into funding certain efforts in Israel, getting involved in certain wars, risking American soldiers' lives because of Israel, and of course, what has happened over the past 20, 30 years? Do you think that Matt Walsh, if he wasn't on the Daily Wire, which is run by obviously pro-Israel Zionist people, do you think that his opinion would be a bit different? Can we just start there? So let me give my answer. Yes, I believe that it would be different. To what extent? I don't know. But Matt Walsh, the type of personality that he has, I'm pretty confident that it would be a lot different. This is why he asked to keep a Matt Walsh on his show, on his platform. With him already getting rid of Candace Owens because of her calling out Israel's actions, Israel's actions, and not just going along with what was seen as pro-Jewish, pro-Israel, pro-Zionist. If he gets rid of Matt Walsh, that makes him look very silly and very disingenuous with certain things that he's been pushing, whether it's free speech, whether it's his old motto of facts don't care about your feelings. Well, is that just true until it actually impacts Israel or until the discussion is centered around Israel? Because if he gets rid of Matt Walsh, now he can't jump on a TV show or jump on a podcast and say, well, yeah, how do we control the media? I disagree with Matt Walsh. Yeah, you disagree with Matt Walsh, who may not see it the same way as you, but obviously is not in the same stratosphere as how Candace Owens was expressing herself on Israel, on issues with Israel and other issues with Jewish people overall, perhaps some people may say. Matt Walsh, we can all see it. Matt Walsh is contained. Candace Owens, that was no different than Buck breaking a slave and letting everybody else know, like, hey, y'all stay in line if y'all want to keep getting these checks from Daily Wire. Some people stay in line. Some people decide not to. Based on what I'm seeing, you know, who's still on there? Michael Knowles or Matt Walsh? I guess people have decided to stay in line. I'm just looking at it. I'm just observing. I'm just observing and calling it out as directly as I can. So let's move on. Let's move on to Bibi Netanyahu saying that you can't be MAGA and not support Israel. It's just another. This is just another example of his arrogance and power. I want to be clear on both. Very arrogant. If I was Trump, I'd be pissed off. Like, yo, stop saying certain things. Who do you think that you are to be saying these certain things? I remember when Trump was sitting down with Zelensky, I forget the exact exchange, but when Trump was sitting down with Zelensky said something regarding what would happen with America if they didn't do certain things or something like that. Y'all can go back and check it out. I should put the clip in here.
Everybody has problems, even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless. God bless. You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that.
That's
Remember
exactly
this. You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel. We're going to feel very good.
You will feel influence.
We're going to feel very good and very strong.
You will feel influence.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards.
I'm not playing cards.
Right now, you don't. You're playing cards.
Mr. President.
You're playing cards.
Serious.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country. That's back to you. Far more than a lot of people said they should have.
Have you said thank you once this entire meeting?
Trump felt that he was overstepping. But with Bibi pretty much saying like, yo, you can't be MAGA and not support Israel. Like what does that say about Trump? Like, what does that say about Trump? Like, yeah, we control Trump. So if you rock with Trump, you rocking with us by default. Whether you're directly rocking with us or whether it's by default, you're still rocking with us. You're still supporting us. Like Bibi Netanyahu, he lets him hang in ways that I've never seen anybody let him hang regarding Donald Trump. It just makes me think over and over about Donald Trump pushing Bibi Netanyahu's chair in. Yo, it's just funny, but let's keep moving on. Ben Shapiro mentioned, and this has come up before, like this whole queers in Palestine thing. and how queers in Palestine actually get thrown off roofs. I don't know how true that is, but this is where the arrogance comes into play, and perhaps him just thinking that we're not that intelligent. Ben Shapiro, how do Christians get treated in Israel? I've seen multiple videos in the past week of Christians getting spit on, kicked on, women getting attacked by kids, right? Little kids assaulting these women. Where did they learn that from? I just saw Officer Tatum. Officer Tatum was talking about a story. Matter of fact, it was while he was interviewing Bibi Netanyahu, and he made this statement of like, oh yeah, we just, we got treated very nice in Israel, but we just only had one kid spit on, one of the people that were with us. Like, wait, what? It's like, oh, that's not, we're just gonna completely disregard that. So it's just funny to me how all of this is presented to people, and maybe they can present this to people because we're just so misguided and we're just so radicalized in our mindset that we just pick based on radical sides. So it's like, even if this person doesn't agree with me, they're not gonna agree with that other side. So it's like, they'll still be with me by default. And the people that will agree with me, maybe I can grow some, new people that will adopt the same mindset that Ben Shapiro has, Maybe he's thinking like, all right, we can grab some people, and the people that we don't grab, the people that are intelligent enough to kind of see through the BS that I'm saying, they're still going to rock with us anyway. They're not going to go over there. I don't know, but and then to finish off with him, and this is where I was kind of checking out, I'll be totally honest. When he was talking about people being entitled, it's like, bro, you're talking about people being entitled while a lot of pro-Israel people, Israelis, a lot of the Jewish population, just being totally honest, tend to feel that Israel should be entitled to receiving money from America. And maybe I shouldn't say Jewish, but, and let me be very clear, I'm not speaking on all Jewish people. Just like when everybody tends to talk about black people, I don't think that y'all are talking about all black people, right? When you speak about the violence and all that, I don't think you're talking about me, are you? So, and the fact that I even have to sit here and say, well, I'm not talking about everybody, that just goes to show you, like, so let me just move on with the point. The fact that a lot of these pro-Israel people believe that Israel should be entitled to receiving help financially, and the aid that we give to Israel is a lot different than the aid that we give to other countries. Look that up as well. We've talked about that in the past, where Israel is able to get their money in a lump sum and it accrue interest while it's sitting in our banks. They get to do whatever they want with the interest money. And they're the only people that when they receive financial aid, that's supposed to be them buying weapons from us, they actually get to take a percentage of that and buy their own weapons from Israeli manufacturers. So when you look at all these things, it's like, whoa, like who's entitled here? Who's entitled? Then above all that, bro, y'all religion, a lot of y'all religion is based on y'all feeling that you are the chosen people by God. But everybody else is being entitled. Like, it's just, look, man, however you allow people to see the world, sometimes they will. When you don't call out people, and I'll be totally honest, the generations, especially maybe the baby boomers, I don't mean to always be harsh on the baby boomers, but the generations before us, y'all were a little bit nervous. And I feel like I'm being nice by saying that and speaking out on certain things that Israel was doing and checking Israel as we are perfectly open to checking our own government. So maybe just something for us to think about, because things are changing. Things are changing. Everybody's being held accountable, and everybody should be held accountable. There shouldn't be all of this elitism. There shouldn't be all of this entitlement And there shouldn't be anybody thinking that they're God's special group of people that is better in whatever way than others. So that's where I'll leave it. Like I said in the beginning, I wanted to make this more about like Ben Shapiro rather than Charlie Kirk. But I think these conversations are important because all of this stuff is connected. I know a lot of times we try to isolate certain incidents occurring, let's say with Charlie Kirk or this incident in the Middle East. We have a problem with war and violence across the world with humanity, period. And violence based on the scriptures only leads to more violence. So when we accept violence here, it allows us to accept violence there in this group. It's all part of the problem. We don't hold violence to the level of evil and killing and war to the level of evil that we should. Once again, we should not have war crimes. War should just be a crime. Now, imagine if we look at war as being a crime. Now, how will we look at some of the things that are occurring that may not have to do with war? People getting killed for having opinions. We have to value life better. We have to be more united in understanding that we are all God's children. We are here to figure out how we can work together and live in peace and harmony as all of us being God's chosen people. So that's where I'll leave it. Hopefully it makes sense to y'all. As always, appreciate the love, appreciate the support that y'all continue to give. And we're going to keep pushing. We're going to keep pushing. So as always, appreciate y'all, and I'll see you on the next video. Yo.
Hey, I'm sorry. I didn't know you were recording.
It's all good.
It's the black guy in the corner, but they'd rather see a on the corner. They say I'm stealing Nick's clips like I'm stealing Nick's chick, not knowing that I hit him first week for the lick. I said, Nick, I could post here while you post there. Let's run the ads up, then let's meet up over there.